So this morning we're beginning this 3-week series. Doug and I have been joining the crowd of meal prep services. And so we have been getting boxes of some meals. And it's been great because they come with pictures and recipes and everything. And all of a sudden we're having to find things to measure ingredients because I'm not known for my high cooking. Poor Doug, he married my mother's daughter. And but so it's been kind of fun looking for, a peeler for a carrot. Wow, cool. I didn't know we had one of those. Anyway, so things that we measure in our life, in our cooking, what does the scripture say? What are the ingredients that the scripture says for us today to think about our life? Well, this theme originated out of the Church of the Resurrection in Adam Hamilton's church. He came up with this theme and the images that we've been using. And part of the impetus for him thinking about this theme was a gentleman named Clayton Christensen, who was a Rhodes Scholar, a Harvard business professor, and every term when he taught, he would talk to his students at the end, and he would talk to them about what kind of things they might value in their lives to make them feel healthy and happy and wise as they left Harvard and went out into the world. And as he aged and went through his life, he ended up with an epiphany of his own, which he shares. He had a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And he said, as I started to get older and go to some of my reunions, high school, college reunions, anyone? Yeah. We start off at the 10-year reunion and everybody looks kind of similar, and then we get to the 30, 40, 50-year reunion and our lives change, we change. He said, I went to school with some very high capacity, high skilled people. He mentioned Jeffrey Skilling from Enron and others. And as he went to these reunions over the years, when younger early on people were rolling through life and discovering, family and school and education and jobs and the excitement, but as we'd come back, as we got older, the strain and the stress, the pressure, the feeling of what was going on in life got people in a different state of reflection. He said a lot of the high achievers didn't know what to do with that. It's almost like their achievements in work were an addiction. You get a hit of success. You make some money, you get a name for yourself, you're mentioned in an article, or your picture's on a magazine or whatever, and it feels good for a moment, and then you want to do it again and again and again. And then you go home, and there's garbage to take out, and there's kids, teenagers, the conversation your spouse wants to have, and you forget that work only lasts a while, and ultimately you can't live on the adrenaline and the stress in the workplace. Although that is so much of our American way, is it not? And so he recognized this as he's talking to the young students. He started trying to convey to them some of these learnings he had had. Now, I'm aware that our Broncos play at 11, and we're not going to be out of here quite, we might not get quite home, but I'm going to speed it up here. But what are the stories, what are the ways that we think about our athletes in our world? I mean, living in a place with national teams is a whole different thing than coming from Montana, let me tell you. How do we measure our athletes? RBIs, singles, doubles, touchdowns, tackles, sacks. That's what we pay them by, right? The more you have, the more we'll give you in the hopes you keep going at it. We expect you to stay at that high place, and the measure we give them of who they are as human beings, after a while, it can be hard to continue that, to measure up, to keep going, especially with any kind of a moral or ethical grounding. And it's easy for the stars that we rely on and that we love watching can become self-destructive. I was reminded of the story a few years ago of a gentleman who played for the Baltimore Ravens, Ray Rice. Anybody remember Ray Rice? By every measure, he was a success, doing great in the pictures and the scores, everything. until a video caught him punching his then girlfriend in the face in an elevator. And all of a sudden it was over. Because that video became the measure for many people of who he was. Underneath all the success, underneath all the pressure and all the plays, that became the measure of who he was. Maybe we measure and pay on the wrong things sometimes. What if we held up and valued not just those stats on the field during the day, but how they act when they leave the field? How they're generous, how they're kind, how they're honest and ethical, to be a model for our kids, youth, and for us as adults. Well, this parable that Reverend Mary read might be familiar to some of you, sometimes called the parable of the sower. You'll see that in some translations. But as we get into it, we realize that it's a parable of the soils. We have different kinds of soils where something grows or something tries to grow or doesn't grow at all. And Jesus, like he did, used very ordinary things to invite us to put ourselves in there and to say, where are you? Where am I today, at this moment, this week? What kind of soil? How would you measure your life based on that? So first example that Jesus gives, the sower scatters seeds on the path, that hard, baked down path trodden with feet and people and wagons and donkeys and horses. Is there going to be much movement? Is there going to be much room for growth on that kind of soil? Maybe not. And yet, how often am I like that well-trodden path? How often do I feel crusty, stiff, unmovable, that I can't let the Spirit of Christ in? That I can't let someone else and their experience, their critique or their advice or their suggestions or their reflection on who I am, but I'm hard and crusty just in my world. Anyone feeling like a hard and crusty soil today? Or can you think of a moment or a time or an experience when you did? It's one of those things that at any moment on any given day, we may go from one to the other to the other. And that's the part of the power of these parables. It's not just you're either this or you're this, but we know that in life, we move back and forth, don't we? So where are you feeling today? The birds eat it, and there's not much room for growth. An author said, there are people in our churches, people around us, people in the pews, people next to us, people across the street from us who have had, or ourselves, who have had hurtful and bad experiences. They may have prayed to God for something to happen. They may have not felt like they've heard an answer, and they feel shut off from the God who loves them. That God who knows you by name, that God who knows your experience and knows the pain and knows the brokenness and is wanting to envelop and love you through it. And there are moments in my life when I think, where were you? I had to get through that all by myself, even though I was never all by myself. But that hard, crusty soil, what are experiences you've had? Have there been people or moments when you've had that crusted through and broken open so that that crisis or pain might become an example of a beginning of healing, a connection with others? And so yes, that number one example, we may all have been there, or we may feel a bit of ourselves there right now. The second example, now the story, we're in the northern part of Israel, where in some places there's limestone with a very shallow topsoil on top. So you scatter the seed and something may grow up quickly, but it's not going to necessarily last because there's not the depth. So it withers and dies in the heat. It may not be able to get to water. And so again, where are you? Where am I? Who do you know? Or when have you in your life had moments of that kind of instant faith, instant growth? I've had people in my life, some that I've loved dearly, that have shared moments. I have a person in my extended family who years ago shared with me an experience where she was going through a tough time, a heartfelt time. She went to a service at church. She went to the altar call, kneeled down, pledged her love to Jesus again, left feeling lighter-hearted, but 3 weeks later said, Kama, I don't understand. It wasn't all fixed. There was still pain and heartbreak to get through. They had an initial wonderful spiritual connection, but it didn't seep into the depth of every moment to hold her through the difficulties that she ended up having to learn to move through and navigate through. On any given day, there may be moments when you feel like, yes, God, you have answered my prayers. Yes, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Yes! And then the next week comes around another bend. And you say, wait a minute, what happened? Where were you? I thought this was clear. It was all written down in my plan. Anyone? Where's the soil? Where's the invitation to sink deep? One example that this parable made me think of was, I was a church camp kid, grew up going to church camp every year. It was awesome. As an adult, also went through some spiritual retreats, the Walk to Emmaus experiences. And there are people who go through these in youth or adulthood, children. They have a wonderful time, they have a spiritual experience, but then they come home and real life is right back where it was. And it can be hard to integrate that together. And so part of thinking about these mountaintop experiences that can be transformative and deepening, and yet, how do we take that back into the day to day, the mundane connections that we need to find a way to ground us. So as you look around today, are there people that you haven't seen or spoke to in a while? Is there someone that you don't know their story well yet? In this congregation of grace, there are people that we may see or glance at or recognize, but we don't know well. Are there opportunities to get to know each other a little deeper, to hear our stories and what we are moving and living through? There's so much depth of wisdom and experience and spiritual reflection right here. Can we deepen ourselves with one another to learn and live that path, that soil together? And the third example, the soil with other seeds and weeds. That was great, Karen, having that weed. I'm one of those. I'm like, oh, that's pretty. It's green. It's growing. Right? But this is convicting for me. If you're a gardener out there, you may have tilled up things for the season because you know that there's next spring coming. But sometimes the seeds and the weeds get mixed in together. And I think, okay, God, there I am. That's my life. I may feel like I'm ready to produce your garden and your harvest, but sometimes I get stuck with a thistle. And isn't it those little tiny thistles that you can't see without a magnifying glass that just get in? And they can be hard to get out. I may feel that I'm moving along and take a turn or say something that I think is fine, and it comes back as a thistle. Sometimes it's self-inflicted, some of my own stuff that surfaces. You know, you say something that you think is helpful, and the person says, no, that's actually not what I meant. That's not how I perceived it. You weren't listening to me. And I have to say, okay, God, where's the thistle? What are you actually calling me to? How can I learn? How can I grow and keep moving? So the grass with the thistle and the weeds, our cares for the world, our competing with others for success and affirmation and wealth. I mean, we are in a cyclone of that in our country. All of these measuring things to see who is the success and who gets left behind. Through the weeds and through the thistles, where is my focus today, oh God? What are you calling me to today? Do I need to pick up some tweezers and get a magnifying glass and look at my own stuff, in addition to whatever opinions I may have of those outside of me? Can I clip the weeds and throw them away so that I may truly be ready for a fruitful harvest for you? See, Jesus saw all these people, and we are all these people. And on any given day, we might behave as one or more or all of those different soils. And we strive for, perhaps, the last example of the pure, the great soil, the depth, the sun, the water, the harvest. And may it come, Lord Jesus. But on the day-to-day, when we're feeling all kinds of ways about ourselves or about others, how are we measuring that life? So today's focus, how will you measure your life? By who and how you love. We are called to measure our lives by who and how we love. So as we think about those soils and the harvest and the seeds that were scattered, where are you at this moment, in this place, in this day, in this time? What has God planted in you? What are you planting with others? Are you extending yourself in others? How are you measuring your world, your career, your statistics, your family, your success? And is that what Jesus would ask us to measure? By how we reach out, by how we care, by how we don't react, but maybe someday think before we speak, speaking of myself. The Bible gives us many examples of measuring of how you love and who you love. There are 540 different words for different kinds of love, one scholar has said. One of those that surfaces to the top is chesed. You know those great Hebrew words where you have to kind of spit in your throat? Chesed. I love that. It's a very embodied word. That's that covenant word, that steadfast love throughout the Old Testament that God and people are called to. That loving kindness that is steady and day after day after day. And one from the New Testament that is listed at least 130 times is agape, that unconditional love of God for each of us that we are then called to strive, to try to emulate with others. And you may have heard me say before, but the Bible doesn't define love as a feeling. We get all caught up in that. Am I feeling love? But it is a doing. It's an action. It's a way to say, I see you. I recognize that there may be a need or something that I'm aware of or not, maybe knowing what to do with it, but can I just sit with you? Can I be with you? Can I lift you up? Can we lift one another up? We are in a world that many days feels broken in many aspects. That hardness of heart that the Bible talks about is in us on any given day. But today, as we think about how we measure our life by who and how we love, may we be reminded in this parable that God's strategy for fixing the world is you. God's strategic plan sent Jesus to show us the way, the truth, and the life, to send us now into the world as agents of his love. Not just with warm, fuzzy feelings, but dogged determination sometimes. So what are the movements and the moments and the actions that you would like others to remember about you? This week, my friends, take home your bulletin, take a look at that parable throughout the week. Let us consider how we measure our lives, by who and how we love. I invite you to pray with me. O God of our lives and our relationships, God who is with us in moments of our deepest joys and pain, God who reminds us over again that we are connected one to another. Help us this day. Help us to see you in the face of the other. Help us to open ourselves to those whose names we do not know or remember, and to those who we know have different opinions and understandings than we. Help us to love, not just in feeling, but in action. Help us to be the kind of Christian that loves well our family, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers. And on this weekend, may we lift up our Native American brothers and sisters. As we love, O God, may we reflect your presence. Help us to do that for you as we measure our lives. And all of God's children said, Amen.